Today I'm here to do a follow-up video talking about my experience with the Kobo Clara color. Now, for disclaimer, this is a device that I bought myself with my own money, so it is not something sent to me by review. And I'm someone who came from only either reading physical books, or while I was already doing digital ebooks, I was exclusively reading them on my phone or a shared tablet, and so because of that I never had the experience of coming from a Kindle or another popular device. And in this video I want to talk about 5 myths that I've experienced in getting into an e-reader, things that everyone told me was going to happen that didn't, as well as 2 truths or 2 specific reasons why I do think for me getting this e-reader was worth it. And I really want to do this and put out this video because I do find that a lot of the e-reader review videos out there are either first technical, and I do think there are people better than me when it comes to talking about the operating system and the screen and so forth, and so I'm not going to provide a lot of technical details here. And then the other type of video that I have seen and watched over and over again are basically promotional videos where the e-reader was sent to them for review and largely with that promotion. And so I find a lot of those videos not very helpful as I was trying to make the decision about whether or not to get an e-reader, because the claims on them, how it was going to change their life and how you needed this in order to be a real reader, sometimes it just was hard to differentiate what was actually a meaningful pro versus a con and what was just someone trying to sell me another product. So I have hopefully a balanced review for you here. These still feel like my early thoughts. I got this e-reader in May of 2025, or was it April? I think it was May. And so with that, I've only had it a few months, and I do want to come back again as I've spent more time with the e-reader and let you know how my feelings do evolve. But here are my 5 myths and 2 truths about getting an e-reader. Is it worth it? Let me know what you think. Here are my thoughts now. All right, so the first one that I want to talk about is the fact that everyone on the internet tells people, and even told me, that I would read more because I got an e-reader. Now, I've talked about before the fact that I have been known to read a lot already. I am someone who reads or has read voraciously over the years, so I did not intentionally pick up this device expecting or hoping for that benefit. And in fact, interestingly enough, one of the things that pushed me to finally get an e-reader is that I've been in a very slumpy mood when it comes to reading. I hate to almost use the word reading slump. It's more the fact that my work has been really demanding. I have a lot of things that are going on in my just general personal life in a good way, that I'm spending more time with friends, I'm going out more and more social. And on top of that, I've gotten into video games and I'm finding them really satisfying as a way to unwind, de-stress at the end of the day. And so I'm actually reading a lot less. And so even though I didn't intentionally pick up the device in order to read more, I was curious to see if the device would be that shiny new toy that would help to really sink me back into the habit of reading that I felt like I'd kind of broken or gotten off the bandwagon and just kind of had a little bit of a falling out with reading this year. Would it really change my reading life? I recognize most of the time when this claim is made, it's talking about people who say haven't read since school and are getting back into reading as an adult and really found the device, the ease of it, the ability to download books and so forth, especially maybe in those parent stages, to be a really good way to get back into reading. And people report reading tens and even 100 or 50 books in a year when they were otherwise reading nothing. And so I can say, as someone who started out the year not reading a ton, falling behind on my own Goodreads goals, and just for my own reading pace, noticeably reading less, spending less time on reading, finishing less books, etc. And that has not changed since getting an e-reader. I would not say that it has improved at all, and if anything, it was part of the challenge of trying to put together this video, and why I do intend to come back later on as I spent more time with the device, is the fact that I have not been reading as much as I would expect to in general, and even of that, as I'll talk about more, only a slice of that ended up happening with digital books, which meant that I wasn't actually having a lot of time in order to really spend with the device over the last few months until my travel, in order to really get a good idea of whether or not this device was for me and being able to provide you with some feedback. So I do think that certainly there are enough people on the internet who will testify that they read more because of their e-reader, and I certainly think that other people can find those benefits because, again, there are enough people saying that it happens, and I don't think that they're lying. But in general, it's one of these things where it can be a great tool to help leverage that. If you're looking to read more, it can be a good way to push you in that direction. But if you're looking for that magic bullet that's just gonna fix your reading and get you back into reading, unless you intentionally make goals and set habits around your e-reader, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't magically happen itself, or at least that is my experience here. Next is the claim that if you get an e-reader, you will always have thousands of books at your fingertips at any point in time. And for me, that wasn't exactly the case. Now, I do want to give a couple caveats that this is going to largely depend on your interest or openness to buying books, because certainly if you have Wi-Fi and internet available when you are reading on your device and you're open to just buying any ebook at any price, you can, for the most part, find them available. Now, I was going through the Kobo library and I did note there was a couple of books that I did consider looking at buying that I couldn't find on there. I recognize that Amazon or Kindle has a larger library in general, but for myself, I think that it really depends if you're looking for indie versus traditionally published. It certainly had a very vast library system and plenty to find there. And again, I'm not looking to do a compare and contrast because my only experience reading a Kindle device has been specifically reading the app on my phone, and I'm personally choosing to step away from the Amazon market in general. But anyway, as someone who prefers to get their books from Libby and through the library and not necessarily always buying ebooks, because of course we know we're buying a license, you don't really own it anyway, so I do try to minimize those purchases, knowing that those books could disappear into the atmosphere at any point in time, regardless of what type of device you go with. Technically, all the licensing is the same. Amazon is just a little bit more aggressive about letting their users know that. And so I did find myself at multiple points in time where I would be sinking into bed at night and opening this and finding I didn't have anything downloaded. And so this wasn't too bad at home because of the fact that I could go on my phone. Typically, I prefer just going there. I'd go through the Libby library, check out some things and send them to my device or so forth and sync it up. And so that wasn't too bad. However, with traveling, I did plan and sync books ahead of time for that. But as someone who, again, hasn't invested in many books that I personally bought, I am then limited to what is immediately available through my Libby library, or had to pre-plan to request books that eventually would become available. And it's certainly possible, and I do think I'll get there because I've done this before with my phone, where if you're aggressively planning and holding books on Libby constantly, you will get a really nice flow of ebooks coming in. But because I haven't been doing that for months, and arguably I often use Libby a lot more for audiobooks, and I tend to get more of my physical books from the library rather than the ebooks. And so I just found myself, there were points in time where I wanted to read on this device and the books that I wanted to read were not available on them. I also get a lot of review copies from publishers, which again, I'm very grateful for, and they're sending physical books in the mail. So again, despite the fact that I wanted to use this device, when I would open it up, I would only have certain books available. I did end up buying some, so I have some of my personal favorite books on here that I can read at any point in time, and that's really nice. But definitely starting out, unless you go on a book buying binge, in my opinion, or have a really robust library system where everything is just always available, I find you don't constantly have nonstop books coming down the pipeline, especially if you're pickier. I've read a lot of books, and so some of the bestsellers, all of that, are things I've already read. And so I found myself, again, waiting weeks and weeks to read something through my library, through this device. And in many cases, I'm still waiting. So just keep that in mind depending on your buying versus borrowing habit. Now, tying in with the last point, there's also the myth, in my opinion, that buying an e-reader will automatically save you money on books. And that is going to largely depend on how you were previously consuming books beforehand. So as I mentioned, I am someone who most of the new releases, I am very fortunate to get early ARCs from publishers for the most part. And then almost everything else that I'm reading comes from my library system, either digitally or again, physically bringing in books. And so I already was not buying a lot of books. For me, it's not really replacing a out-of-hand physical book buying problem. The books you see behind me, I think almost all of them, if not all, are books I've already read, and I have some other books in the house, but again, I don't have a crazy book buying problem. Not that book buying is a problem, but you know what I mean. And so it didn't necessarily save in that regard disregard. And because of the last point I just made, I actually found myself rebuying some books that I own physically because I wanted to have more of them available to read on my device. So I bought a copy of Blindside by Peter Watts, which again, I have the physical book, but it was on sale and I thought I'd pick it up. I bought the first book in the Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu, which again, I have the physical books, but I thought that it would be really convenient to have these thick, chunky books on my e-reader because I do like to reread them, especially the earlier books, more often. And so I did this with a few books in my collection. And so I'm not saving money by rebuying books I already have just to be able to experience them in a different version. And so I definitely can see between Kobo deals or any other ebooks services that they all run these crazy cheap deals, but they also tend to add up very quickly. If you actually look at, if I were to be buying 5 books a week, so forth, I'm already easily spending more money than I was previously because I honestly wasn't spending much money at all. And I do think, especially depending on where you're living, because I live here in Canada, that e-readers, in my opinion, are still quite expensive. I got comments on previous videos when I was waffling back between buying an e-reader and not, people saying, oh, they're so cheap, why are you making a whole video about this, just go buy the thing. And for me, spending nearly, actually I think it was over $200 with the case on an e-reader felt like a lot. And so I don't want to disregard the fact that in order to buy the device to make books cheaper, you then have to first put out a bunch of money. And again, in a lot of cases, if the books that I'm looking to buy digitally aren't on sale, they can be just as expensive as the physical copy. And again, you're buying a license, so you're really not buying anything other than the experience of going through it as long as it stays in your collection. So I just want to kind of challenge that perspective because definitely I can see it as a situation where it feels cheaper and could easily turn into a microtransaction nightmare depending on who you are and your own spending habits. Then myth number 4 is that if you buy an e-reader, there will be no more distractions. This is the distraction-free device and you will be able to read for hours without looking at your phone, checking notifications, and you will just be able to focus and get through so many books faster. I know that there's lots that can be customized, especially with Kobo. It's one of the things that people really love about the device. I didn't do any of that. I didn't get into any of the different interfaces or things that I can install. I kept it pretty simple, and yes, there isn't a lot to do with the device, but I think the part that everyone seems to miss when they say that as a selling point is the fact that yes, there isn't much to do on here, but usually my phone isn't too far away. And there are times I will try to put it on a shelf, I will go charge it across the room, things like that. But arguably, if I'm reading something and it makes me think, oh, I want to go look that up on my phone, I'm curious about that, I wonder if someone texted me, I hear my phone beep, whatever the case, I didn't find switching devices, checking my phone, getting up, it didn't seem like any more of a barrier. Basically, I was either going to let myself be distracted or I was not. Maybe it's a little bit better than reading directly on your phone, but I'm already someone who silences all my notifications. If it's not someone actually physically like texting me or calling me, all my other apps are silent, so I actually have to go into the app to see if I have notifications, etc. And so that's not the hugest deal. And again, I really think if you are buying the device with the selling point that you will never be distracted, you will just read for hours at a time. If you're someone who struggles with distraction now, I personally feel that those distractions will still be there, or at least they were for me. When I was focused, I was focused. When I wasn't, and I really didn't feel like the device itself really created that much more of a reading environment or barrier to me doing what I wanted, good or bad, when it came to not getting distracted and going down rabbit holes that were not reading. And the last myth I have for you is the fact that everyone told me that if I got an e-reader, I would never go back. And that is generally what most people said. There was a few exceptions in the comments of my previous videos, but in general, people said that once you get an e-reader, it'll be such a life-changing experience that you will never ever contemplate going back to reading on a phone or a tablet. Now, I do want to acknowledge that since getting an e-reader, I have done very little e-reading on other devices. However, if my e-reader were to break tomorrow, we would be back in the same annoying boat that I drove you all nuts when I waffled over getting my first e-reader, and suddenly I'll be making videos about whether or not I should get another e-reader or just go back to my phone, because while I love the benefits, which I'll talk about in a moment here, if I'm honest, while I love these benefits, I could see myself, again, given the barriers of the cost of getting a new device and all of that, would be prohibitive and really would make me think twice before immediately jumping in and getting another one. And so I'll be honest, I would probably go back to reading on my phone and a tablet or whatever else was available around my house before getting a new e-reader. It might be something I eventually get for a special birthday treat or something like that. But knowing myself, I know that I would have to go through that whole process and decision making again, and getting to see the device for myself, getting to experience it, it's great, it does have its benefits. But is it the life-changing, I can never go back, I can never ever read on my phone again? For me, not necessarily. I do want to acknowledge that I don't necessarily have the migraines and other issues that a lot of people report reading on their phones. But honestly, if I had to go back to my phone, I could do it. Would I grumble a little bit at first? Maybe, but I know myself, I'm cheap. I would probably at least spend another year back on my phone before I would commit to getting another device if it were to break tomorrow or even in the next year or two. So definitely something to consider. And again, it largely depends on who you are as a reader and purchaser, kind of how cheap are you? Because I'm a cheap Canadian and definitely I would have to think twice to throw out more money after getting this device. All right, now let's switch gears to the two truths or the pros that I really identified that to me made this device worthwhile. And again, this comes from someone who did not have a dedicated e-reader, so this is true for anyone who is currently not reading on an e-reader and is trying to decide if it is worth it. For me, there were two main benefits. First is the fact that everyone told me that the screen is nicer than an LCD screen like my phone. And I would agree. It was hard to tell that in the shop. I did get a chance to demo the device in a bookshop here, but there's something about reading standing up over fluorescent lights where you have a cashier who's asking you if you're done yet with the demo version and all of that. It was just hard to really experience it, but when you actually get the device, you're holding it in bed or on a train or something like that, there is something really nice about it that does have this feel that almost, feels very premium. Everything people describe as that e-ink. It looks nice. It does look like paper without being paper. It is somehow different than, again, those backlit screens and all of that. And I did see the appeal. It just felt really nice. It felt like I had treated myself to this nice way to read that was just very enjoyable. So once I actually spent some time with the screen, I was able to recognize, oh yeah, this is really nice. Again, could I live without it? Technically. But if I had to choose between the two, you give me a phone, you give me an e-reader, I will pick the e-reader. In my mind, there's a reason everyone talks about e-ink, and I do get that now. So I do want to acknowledge it that you were right in that regard, and you just really do have to experience it for yourself. And a lot of people made the recommendation to me, which I never ended up being able to do, but if you do have a friend that has an e-reader, if they can lend it to you for a couple nights or a week, I really do think that that is one of the best ways, because again, it lets you actually take the device home, sit on the couch, sit on your bed, and see if you really notice the difference in the screen type, because that was something that I didn't really know how I'd feel about it until I brought it home. And the last benefit for me is probably the hugest, and this is really the reason that I will be keeping this device, and that is the fact that it was really nice to have an e-reader with traveling. So without getting into too much detail, I had two separate work trips that ended up being combined into one due to flights getting canceled, and so I ended up spending 7 days straight away from home. I did not charge my device before I left. I thought I had charged it, but apparently I didn't properly plug it in or something. So when I opened it up on the first flight, I saw that it was down to 35%, and I had a bit of a panic moment, but I realized that the whole purpose of the device was to read, so I went ahead and read it on that flight and didn't worry about the battery getting lower as I went. I did have a chance to briefly charge it between flights during a layover, and I was impressed with how quickly it charged, and then I never charged it again for the rest of the trip, even though I never even got it to a full charge, just kind of topped it up a little bit, and it lasted the rest of the week. I was working, so I don't want to pretend I was aggressively reading the entire time, but it was nice that I didn't worry about charging it after the fact. I never even looked at the battery after that first check on the first flight. And besides that, there also was the fact that if it did die, let's say if it died on my last flight home, it wouldn't have been a big deal because I didn't need that device in order to make an emergency call, in order to message my family. So if it did die, it was fine because it wasn't my phone, which I always try to keep topped up to a degree so that, again, if I need it, especially when traveling alone for work, I want to make sure I can actually use it for those important calls and messages. And so that was great there. It's also, as everyone describes, it's lightweight, it's small. It was one more thing for me to keep track of as you're going through security and TSA, and just making sure that I didn't leave it at one of the hotels, because I switched hotels 4 times over that trip. And so it was definitely something to be mindful of, but the convenience for me outweighed the parts of it that made it cumbersome, or again, one extra thing to keep track of. For me, it was definitely worthwhile. And again, really enjoyable to have that if I were to plan another trip, which again will come up for work. And so with that, I'm going to make sure that I have more books available, more books downloaded. I'm going to kind of keep an eye on different Kobo sales so that again, ideally I have a really nice library. I'm jealous of those people who have thousands of books at their fingertips digitally at all times, because again, part of what I love about reading in a digital fashion is the ability to decide what I want to read in the moment rather than having only a few pre-selected books to read, which is kind of what I had for the trip. But again, that's more on me and a lack of preparation. So needless to say, if you are someone who travels a lot for business or perhaps travels a lot in your own free time, I do think there are some real clear benefits there. If you're reading at home, I do think that the experience of the screen, in my mind, is a step up from an LCD phone type screen, and so there is value there as well. However, if people tell you that this is the best thing ever, that you need it to be a real reader, that your reading will just be changed forever because of this device, personally, I feel like they're overselling the product. Maybe other people disagree and really do feel that strongly about how the device has changed their own reading life. For me, it hasn't to that degree, and I don't think it ever will, but I'm also glad that I got a chance to finally experience it for myself. I don't regret the purchase, and again, I'm recognizing that I'm very privileged to be in a position where I had the money to put aside and put towards a device. So if anyone is interested in getting an e-reader, love to hear your opinions down below. Again, I have no affiliate links. I'm not trying to sell you anything. If you pick one up, just drop a message. If you are going to stick with reading physical books, that's cool too. If you already have one, love to hear what you're reading, what you like about it, what you don't. If you agree with my points or disagree, let's talk about it all down below, as long as we can keep it nice and respectful. Love to hear from you there. Let's talk then. If you're new to my channel, hopefully you stick around, subscribe, hit the little notification bell, hit the thumbs up if you think I deserved it, drop a comment, even just an emoji, something to represent books, and otherwise I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.